Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session with Michael Sinocchi, our publisher of Steel Toes and Stilettos. I'm Kathy Miller, and this is my colleague, friend, and co-founder of OpSister, Shannon Carls. And we're excited to kick off our launch week with you this week and talk to Michael about Steel Toes and Stilettos and what it was about the book that made Productivity Press pick it up and makes it special and unique from other lean books and other publications. I worked in and around manufacturing for a number of decades and all the way through as senior executive. And Shannon has also worked mostly as a supply chain expert, manager, and executive in and around manufacturing as well. And so we have teamed up to tell you a true story about a number of plants that we transformed together, creating an inclusive culture, a lean culture, and getting great business results. And so we're hoping that you'll take the opportunity to pick up the book, share it with your friends, and if nothing else, be entertained by some of the anecdotes and stories that we tell about our journey of the lean transformation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael and ask him to say a few words about Steel Toes and Stilettos and himself and the whole publishing process.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Mike Sinocchi. I work for Taylor and Francis, well, more specifically Productivity Press, which is an imprint of Taylor and Francis. Been acquiring books on lean and performance improvement, operational excellence since the 90s, dare I say it. And what attracted me to this book is that it checked so many boxes as far as what I'm looking for now on books that deal with performance improvement. Not only did it detail a great story about lean implementation, which is the overarching material that I'm looking for, it told a great personal story. And for someone like myself, who's been acquiring books in this area for so long and has been involved on the editorial side, peripherally with manufacturers and manufacturing people since the 90s, I just thought the story was amazing because even in the 90s, when I was young, it was a male-dominated industry. When I used to go on these plant tours and when I would go to the conferences, everything was geared towards supervisors who were male and plant managers who were male. It was a very male-dominated industry. So it was great to hear a success story about how two women actually navigated this over the years and actually have a great success story to tell. So it was just great material for me. And what I liked about it was that I published a number of books over the years that have dealt with tools and how you, in a sense, apply a tool to solve an issue. And I think that's great. And I think initially in the early days, that was very important. Got people involved with teams, got some great initial results. You got to see processes change, processes improve, but there was that problem with sustaining the initiatives. So what I liked about your book is that it talked from the personal side on how you're dealing with mindsets and how you're almost dealing with workplace culture, more so than just we had a successful Kaizen event or our Kanban system is now doing this. So I think that's why I think the book hits all these areas.
Well, I'm glad you recognize those things, Shannon.
Yeah, and Michael, when you read our story, was there anything that surprised you by it, considering what you said about it being a little bit of a different type of a lean book?
It's interesting. What didn't surprise me about it was what was happening when you were talking about manufacturing in particular and what was happening on the inside of the manufacturing world. One thing that jumped out at me when I was reading through the book, I actually had to read this over a couple times. I think there was one story you mentioned in there where I think one of your companies that you were working for had an affiliation or association with a country club. Mm-hmm. And I think you even mentioned that one of the bars or one of the areas was set up for men only. Mm-hmm. And I actually had to flick back. I'm like, what year is this? 1980? I actually read it a couple of times because that was on the outside of manufacturing. I was like, wow. And so I thought it was really interesting to read that, because not only is existing, say, within the culture of on the ground within manufacturing, but all these other areas as well that you don't necessarily consider. And I think for someone like myself, again, you have a tendency to just assume that what you know, what you experience, what you in a sense grew up with is like, well, that's everyone's experience. You have a tendency until you actually are able to step out and see like a larger. I would have never guessed that. I don't. I found that more shocking for me. I know it was an ancillary part of the book because I was expecting more of like the male dominated culture within the actual manufacturing shop, but I didn't expect it, say, like on this executive level well as well. So that's my own ignorance, as it were. So I found that enlightening.
Oh, I appreciate that. It is surprising to still hear that those types of things do still happen on a regular basis. And there is a little bit of exclusion that happens every now and then. That's just one example of how that works, and why it's so important for us to really develop these inclusive cultures so that we can people can recognize that those things are still happening and try and make it much more of an even playing field.
Yeah. No, I just think I don't understand. What's interesting is that what happens, I think, ancillary in situations like that affects how you're going to then perform on the job or your attitude on the job. I think it works on an unconscious level. I think when you actually get back to the organization and you're managing folks, I think it creates a different perspective on where you are in your job and whether you trust the situation or actually you think about how successful you could be as well. So I think it creates even more of a situation of something that you have to overcome.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Michael, what you mentioned a little bit about how we talk less about the tools, but in your opinion, with publishing all these different types of books in this type of genre, what really makes this book different for people to read than a traditional lean book, outside of just the fact that we don't talk as much about the tools?
Well, again, where I think your book is successful is that it straddles the line where you're dealing with you're talking about what you're going through personally as well. And I think what happens is that a lot of times, if other authors try to do that, especially if they're a lot of authors out there are trying to create business novels as well, where they're trying to weave like an actual fictional story around it. And when you're going in that area, that takes a literary skill. A lot of the authors are practitioners first. They don't have the literary skills to build an actual compelling story. What I thought was interesting about your book, or what I really liked about it, is that you balanced that well through what you guys were actually doing on a personal side, but it didn't overwhelm the story. It almost complemented the story. You didn't get lost in that, or you didn't get distracted by that. I think as well. So I think that was a very, very strong part of the book that I don't see in other books. It's either just trying to weave in some type of very light story to make it a business novel and then focus on, charts and improvements or whatnot, or you have an author that's maybe overreaching, trying to develop a story, and they don't really have the skills for like character development and interactions and things like that.
Yeah, and it's actually autobiographical. So we didn't have to make anything up,
Right, but I think you told it well without getting too much into like the weeds where you got like, oh, okay, I'm reading two separate books here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think that was important for us to convey. And you're right, it was a little tricky to do, and it took us a few iterations to get it right. But that life does go on outside of the four manufacturing walls, and there's all other kinds of challenges that we deal with on a work life balance mentality of things that still happen in life, even when you're trying to lead businesses and drive these excellent results and have all the stress and pressure that goes along with that. You still have real life, family and children and everything else to deal with. And that was really important to Kathy and I to convey that in a way, to show that maybe you can't do it all perfectly, definitely not perfectly, but you can certainly strive towards having both of those worlds if you have the correct support structure in place. And that was something Kathy and I found in our relationship with each other that helped us to be successful as well.
Exactly. And I think what you see in a lot of books is as well is a lot of times authors will will talk about a certain, their experiences with certain process improvements and what they were leading. What I thought was great was that you guys actually talked about it. Yeah, how it affected your family, how it affected your personal life. Because a lot of times you just read the books where it's, I was working as a
Mm.
certain middle manager, some, and then I accepted the role as VP, and I moved to the San Fernando Valley, and we were working, and then it's just, you don't really get like, oh well, what does this mean?
Mhm.
Are you single? Is it just, how does that work? You just,
Mhm.
where you just focused on wherever your job was going to take you, that was where you were going to go, and everything was secondary to that. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people as well. So what I thought was interesting is that you were actually brought up in the book issues that you had to contend with, where you're like, oh, we are successful, or we have an opportunity for success here, but we have to balance it with decisions that have to be made that are going to affect our families, and just our personal lives. So I thought that was I thought that was very interesting, too, because you don't really get. And again, I think this is my own personal, I can't speak for the majority, but I think it's a lot different for women, in this situation, because what I've seen over the years, and I'm sure this exists in manufacturing as well, if a male character or person is getting promoted and they're successful, a lot of times, like, oh well, he got married, he had a kid, it doesn't necessarily change their view, or the company's view of you as a manager, because
Mhm.
it's just like, oh well, he's got married to his kid. But with a woman, I think it's a bit different, where I think, like, you know before her career, before having two kids, her career after having, and what is that going to, I think it works on an unconscious level, where I think a lot of questions that don't come up for males in those roles, as well, that exist on an unconscious level within a company.
Yeah, that's really interesting observation, and I bet you're probably right. I don't think that we necessarily think of it that way, right? Because we're just in the thick of things, trying to manage all the things, the children, the husband, the house, and very responsible jobs. So, there's really not a lot of time to think about those sorts of issues. So I think you're right, and I'm glad that you found value in us conveying ourselves as entire people, right? And
Yes.
not just the career person, because we're all very complex people, and have lots of aspects to our lives, and that's just the reality, right, of working today. So we definitely wanted to try to provide inspiration to other people in similar situations, that says, look, you can be successful, there's a lot to juggle and balance, and you do have to make choices, from time to time. But if you stick with who you are, there can be great rewards for you and your company as well.
Sure. Well, I think that's an important aspect of the book for me as well, where if you have someone in a situation, especially a female in a managerial role, pursuing, in manufacturing, and wondering if this is an area that I can excel in, or I can succeed in. I think in any case, when you have something printed where it's like, okay, well, the explorers have gone here before, this ground has been
Mhm.
covered, okay, this can be done,
Yeah.
so I think that's the importance of the book as well, where it can work on that inspirational level, where it's like, oh okay, I'm not alone here, or other people have dealt with this as well, and here it is documented, and it's a success story. So I think it works on that. I think it's really important for younger female leaders in that area.
I would agree. And just to piggyback on that, Michael, with you reading the book and kind of understanding that, that's definitely one aspect we wanted to go after, is to inspire young women to get into these roles of STEM and manufacturing and all of those types of engineering aspects. Who else do you think could benefit from reading this book?
Well, I think anyone working it, for instance, myself as a male, I think it's very important for males to be reading this book as well, because I don't necessarily think for me, when I was reading your book, there's a lot of stuff where it was more, wow, I didn't realize this because you're in, it's not because I'm a good person or a bad person, it's just because you just don't see it. You have a tendency to get stuck in your silo and you don't realize that, well, I think a lot of people have a tendency to be like, okay, this was my experience and this is how I was successful. Now, my job as a mentor is to just tell you how I was successful and you're to follow that, like that, because that just has a tendency to be, I think, a bit more of, I don't know, you're just driven that way. I just think it always seems logical a lot of times. So I think with your book, I think everyone should read it because it just makes you realize of certain different experiences that you wouldn't necessarily consider. And that's how I think it was enlightening to me.
I appreciate that. And that was our one of our goals as well, is that it can be read as a a guide for lean implementation and following a structured approach on how we were successful. But it can also be read as exactly what you said, a novel and more of a leadership guide on how we were successful in bringing the people along to drive that really positive work culture that we believe truly is where our success lied.
Mm-hmm. But and I think that's the success for any lean or performance improvement initiative. Because if you think about it, if you look at the history of these of lean or even like operational excellence and performance initiatives, all the ones that have sustained, all the support has come from the top. It started with top leadership, because what happens is that I think it's always going to hit a brick wall if it starts in the middle and then you just have leadership that in a sense is just either just going along with it or just saying, well, yes, I'm supporting this, and you're just throwing money at it or whatnot. To get that full, I think, transformational aspect of lean initiatives, it has to come from the top down, and there really has to be an understanding of it from the top down. You need that cultural change. Or I think what happens is just you're focusing so much on the tools, where what happens is it's not necessarily a lean initiative where it's not transformative. You've just maintenance a few processes, you've charted a few improvements on a spreadsheet, and you've been, oh, okay, that's great. But then it stops. It hits a brick wall there, and you haven't really done anything that's in a sense like transform the organization. So I think that was important in your book as well, talking about the culture and the mindset that exists.
And so, Michael, do you see there's a trend on the types of manuscripts and proposals that you're getting, that people are recognizing this gap with the cultural or people part? Or do you think that we're just at the beginning of people starting to understand that that's what it takes to really create a successful transformation that's sustainable?
I think for people who are on the inside have known this for a while. I think we're just at the beginning as far as companies realizing this as well. I think it's very important, just because I've seen, I guess, because I've been involved in this area for so long, where I've seen the initial wonder with lean initiatives over the years as far as the improvements. But then I've seen where it was, you go to conferences, you hear about people talking about, like I said, how it's plateauing, or how it worked to a certain spot, but then it fell apart because it was relying on certain people. And if they leave the company, the culture's not built in. So these folks that the champions leave the company, then the company backslides. Then I saw that stage. Then you saw the backlash against lean, in a sense, where folks were saying, hey, we did lean, it only did this, it doesn't really work. It's almost just, in a weird way, it's almost just sort of like, I don't know, religion or something like that. You take like a certain part of it, you're just sort of like, oh, well, that's all I need, and doesn't seem to be working, and that's it. And then you abandon it. And I think that's what's happened. I've seen the backlash as well. And I think what's happened is because there haven't been enough books or literature focusing on what transformational change is needed. I think because it's hard, and it's not as, you can't bullet it out. You can't make a bulleted list and say this, do it, and you're good. Where in other situations, I think dealing with tools, a lot of times you can. So I think we're just at the beginning, and I just think it's really important. And it's changing a lot now too. Post-COVID, there's a whole bunch of different cultural issues we're going to have to deal with as far as how work gets done and how productivity is measured and how employee satisfaction is measured and things like that. And just feeling, I guess, like part of a company or defining what a team is, how actual team functions.
So what are the specific types of books and manuscripts that you're looking for going forward?
I'm basically looking for, again, I'm looking for books or material that focuses on, I guess, these long-term issues that affect management. Like I said, I'm sort of past the tools, but I need material out there that deals with how this is sustainable and taking in I think a number of issues as well, as far as sustainability, green manufacturing, and things like that. How lean and performance improvement is going to integrate with lean manufacturing, and even I think lean manufacturing on the R&D side as well, because for the longest time, lean was focused on how you're basically creating your product as efficiently as possible, and you're getting the product out the door and you're responding to customer needs. But you really weren't focused on, well, what about that product, like after it's out in the market, because it almost wasn't your problem anymore. But where is all this stuff ending up? Where are all these products? Can you create products that then can come back to the manufacturer for either like some type of recycling or something like that? It isn't just, well, the landfill isn't our problem, when these products are longer. Now it is our problem. And so it's just one of those things. Are you creating like products that actually can be recycled by the manufacturer? So things like that, like longer term issues like that. And I think like taking in, I think like a lot of digital issues as well, where I think something like, what's going to be, especially when it comes to manufacturing, what's going to be the real impact of, say, 3D printers, when that gets on a commercial level? Like, how is that going to affect supply chains? How is that going to affect customer relationships? How is that going to affect the delivery of your product? Things like that, like larger technological issues like that as well.
Yeah, that's really great input. Michael, have you seen, and I'm asking this because I'm not sure that I am as familiar. When we talk about manufacturing, people often think about the factories and transforming the factories. And Kathy and I, we did both. We factories and we went into the office and we did a holistic enterprise transformation. Do you see that as much, or is it much more factory focused?
No, I think I've seen a lot of that now, because I think what folks have realized is, again, you hit that brick wall. You're like, okay, if everything is working well on your factory floor, then what about the support areas? And I think I remember the days, I would be sitting in conferences back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you'd have two people sitting in a workshop for lean accounting, and they'd be like, what? This is never going to work. What, are you kidding me? And you realize that you could never get to a certain point if your accounting system, because your accounting system loved inventory, your accounting system, because that was the worth. They were measuring the worth of the company based on how much inventory was sitting in the warehouse. So I think things like that, these support areas are just as important for that overall success of the long-term success of a performance improvement or lean initiative. So I think, those are, I think the factor, there's always more information, but I think that's been fully covered. And I think that's why it's expanded out into these other areas, such as, lean accounting and product development, R&D, and areas like that.
So, Michael, we're very excited about our book being published, our debut piece of work. And, Shannon and I have talked about other books and other themes that we'd like to pursue in the future. And since the book has been published and it's out, only very recently here in the last couple of weeks, I've been getting all kinds of calls from friends who are like, tell us about book publishing. How did you get it published? And, do you have any recommendations for us? So as Shannon and I want to, start working on a second piece of work, and for all of our friends, what kind of advice would you have for budding authors who would like to get published?
I think it's important. One of the mistakes that I see that authors don't do a lot of times when they have a great idea for a book is get out there and see what's already out on the market, as far as making sure that your book is unique, and then gearing your book maybe to cover areas that aren't or already covered. Because I think what happens is that a lot of times potential authors say they're working as a consultant or they're working within an organization. They'll come up with some great results and think, wow, I've got to document this. And I think this is a great story for a book. And I think they're excited about it because they've experienced the success. But I think it's then very important to see, well, what's out there already. And you don't want your book getting lost because a lot of people are assuming, well, that was already covered in this other book, or this is already out there. You want to find that unique aspect of your book very early on. And even if you have a good idea, maybe even start gearing it towards that way. Well, my original idea was this, but now that I've seen other books that are out there, other literature that's out there, where can I gear this book to capture something unique, or something that hasn't been covered?
That's a great piece of advice. That's a really good piece of advice. So as we bring this to the close, any last things you'd like to say about Steel Toes and Stilettos?
The only thing I'd like to say is everything that we've talked about here. I haven't come across a book lately that has hit so many of these great areas that I think is important for the market. So I can only say congratulations to both of you, because I don't know if that was by design. If you're just like, well, this is our story, this is the way we saw putting the book together. But it really has, the proverbial checked so many important boxes as far as books out in the market, and how they'll appeal to an audience, and just how I think they can actually provide a lot of worth for folks on so many different levels.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah.
We really appreciate that.
And and Shannon and I have such passion around creating strong manufacturing businesses where people are included and can contribute and bring, their best selves to work. And we believe that those are totally consistent with getting good business results. So we're really hoping that this story helps businesses and leaders of all types to strengthen their business through the roadmap and some of the techniques and people issues that, that we talked about. So really hope everybody will take an opportunity to check it out. It's available on any place you buy books, the Routledge website, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can check out our website at www.opsisters.com for the links to where you can buy your books. And if you need help with your businesses along this transformation, we hope you'll get in touch with us. Thanks, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Michael.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.